flowering onions.
Good for you.
Yeah.
I didn't notice little bouquets or just...
I'm sorry, go ahead. I just stepped in the swamp. They would make nice bouquets. I don't think we are. In fact, these are leeks.
Maybe you're saving the seed.
Yeah, saving some seed. Good little habitat for beneficials.
Yeah.
Even stuff like this chard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of never it's almost never a bad thing.
There's a bee feeding this one right now.
Were those leeks?
Yeah, those are leeks.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Overwintered, or did you just plant them in the spring?
No, they would have overwintered.
Yeah.
There was a big bed of leeks here,
Yeah.
and we took from them. And then I mean, you're looking at it. You leave a few, and oh gee whiz, forgot about the leeks, and come back, and there's nice, pretty flowers that all the animals are enjoying.
When did you set them out?
The leeks?
Yeah.
Probably the same time we did onions. Real early year, mid January.
Oh, okay.
Maybe no, or maybe it was last. Could have been last year.
I would think that they would still be vegetative if you set them out in January.
Yeah, because they're day neutral.
There's water right there. I think there's water right there if you want to rinse them.
They don't need them.
If you want to.
Let's go see what's happening in the other greenhouse.
Right.
I gave Gene those numbers.
Well, yeah, I called him
I'll call him. I'll have some.
the day before yesterday, I guess. Yeah, and I figured he's probably just really busy.
Yeah, we all are. It's over on Grandview. Heading down 191.
Okay.
So this is an interesting little space. Let me just give you a little brief history lesson. This used to be gravel in here, and this was kind of, we had tables, and it was more of a setup for what you might find for like a nursery or whatnot, like a planting nursery. And then we decided to make it a vegetable space. It's actually one of the better greenhouses. It's got real good exposure, and it's just the perfect size to be some little special, like early tomatoes or really late nice salad mix or whatnot. So it's kind of a valuable space. Most greenhouse space is. We put some chickens here over the winter. We just put down tons of carbon, whatever we could find, and then we did some cover crops, and then we did some vegetables. But this is, I believe, yeah, this is some Sudex.
So you just left the gravel? You're just trying to build?
No, we took all the gravel out, and it was a big, long ordeal.
So you had subsoil under it, basically.
Yeah.
Packed soil.
Yeah, pretty rough looking stuff too. We've been kind of amending it and taking our time, and but that's a good chunk. Original, yeah, that's good.
Is that the chunk of the original soil?
Yeah, I think so. Here's one. That's a good one. Real, subsoil, real kind of lots of minerals from all that gravel and stuff. But not really much organic matter. And we've got a touch of a drainage issue in here too. This little property really receives a lot of water. But even in here, even again, it's I don't want it to look like we neglect our stuff, but even again, it has kind of taken over. But all this is doing is just there's diversity of plants. There's its own little ecology in here, and all this stuff's going to do is build organic matter, and again, we'll probably come in here and flail mow. We might put down another round of cover crops.
Are you harvesting your chard, your Swiss chard, or are you just?
We actually ate on it pretty well through late winter, early spring this year. We kind of leave it go once it reaches that point. It certainly is still all fine and edible, but it does get a little bit more bitter. Chard's nice though. It's one of those few grains that can handle the heat. So, and we may save some seed from them and whatnot too.
Pretty amazing.
But
The fact that chard got this big really speaks well for the fertility
I
in
was
here.
going to say,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you could sit there and feed it all day and not get some of it that size that I've seen.
yeah.
It's amazing. That is nice.
And the Sudex looks pretty happy too. Your
Yeah.
chickens must have really done a number.
Done a
on
good
it.
job, yeah.
Yeah, the fertility's here. Now it's just a little bit of tilth
Yeah.
and organic matter and time.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what I would imagine we would do is let this get up just a touch more, and then mow it. Just flow mow all this, and that I know you said this. That'll really stimulate the.
Yeah.
The
I'll
regrowth.
definitely let it get somewhat bigger than that. Get about this high, and then come through and flail mow the whole thing, but leave about 8-10 inches of stubble. Maybe even the cowpeas will grow back, but definitely the Sudex will.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chard will probably be finished because it's already in head.
Yeah, at that point, yeah, it'll. But you know, before we do that, we come in here and wipe it all out and donate it or whatnot, or maybe we may save some seeds or something.
How many chickens did you have in here?
My flock is always changing. 150.
Wow.
Wow.
And were they confined in here, or did they go out too?
I had a great idea to put them in here. It wouldn't have been last winter. It was the winter before this winter, the one that was real cold with all the snow. And it was cold and it was snowy, and I'd let them out and watch them slip on the ice and all this other stuff. So I had this great idea, because we just figured all this out, to put all the chickens in here and just come in here, and anytime it really stank, not really horrible, but anytime you're like, whoa, just come in here with tons of carbon, straw, hay, leaves, and it worked pretty good for a while. They got ahead of me. They got ahead of our carbon supply, and I had to take them out. So they were only in here for about a month, maybe 6 weeks. But still, with that activity and the way they work the soil and whatnot, I mean, by the time they left, there was every bit of 12 inches of this compacted and layered manure, leaves, manure, straw, manure, whatever. And we put down some compost, and I think we followed that with a cover crop. But it worked well. If anyone does that, let me just say real quick, airflow goes a long way with all that ammonia from all that manure. It didn't get too bad in here, but
Do you think like 20 birds would have been a good number?
I think if you could stick 20 birds in a greenhouse over the winter and give them enough space and do that same technique, I think it'd be great. I think it'd be great for the soil. I think it'd be great for the birds. Now, if you do have any established cover crop, any green, I mean, they'll wipe it right out. They'll eat it. But then on the other hand, when you take them out, if you want crops or a cover crop, probably better a cover crop because it's fresh manure. But still, you'd have a real clean slate for that stuff to go in. They were a little happier too. They can take the cold, but they don't mind a little shelter. Let's see what's happening in the garden.
Wheels turning.
Well, I know some people that have some greenhouses that just need to be renovated.
Onions from cedar sets.
See.
Nice. What variety?
I don't recall.
Olympic? No. What's the one? See, copra?
Copra? Yeah,
Copra,
over
maybe?
storage onion.
Yeah. Or maybe it's copra. We wrote it down. I don't recall exactly what it is.
A lot of people don't do because it does seem to do well. And it's stored really well.
Yeah, we're really looking for for storage on
Wow, more of those big pom-poms, the leeks.
We've been trying. It's been a little tricky, and if we have the time and the seed, to establish a clover in between our rows in our paths. And this is a good one because it's at least it's fairly good. You know, it's doing pretty good. But it's perennial. It's tough. It's hardy. You can mow it. It comes right back. And then we always figured if those vegetable roots make their way down in there, then they've got like a lagoon kind of feeding them and fixing some nitrogen and whatnot.
So the mulch you're using here, is that just from the little hay, or is that come from somewhere else?
It's hay.
In the beginning.
It's hay. Listen, if you get hay for mulch, you need to make sure that it wasn't sprayed with certain stuff.
Yeah, they call the pyridine carboxylic acids. They're extremely persistent. You can spray a field, graze a horse in that field, collect the manure of that horse, compost that manure to NOP standards, which makes it food safety safe. Put it on your squash, and your squash leaves will all go like this, and they'll stop yielding.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Vicious stuff.
Yeah, it really sticks around, and yeah, it's just as you said. Yeah, that's really vicious.
I used to, for the longest time, I thought, well, that's ridiculous. Something that makes land permanently poisonous for 3 years or longer, poisonous to all broadleafs, including clover, should be illegal. And then I actually encountered a situation that made me understand why these herbicides were invented and why they are popular. Some horses are able to survive on such minimal feed that if they get too much and if they get too rich, they eat clover, they will actually get sick. They'll get laminitis, which basically lames the horse, and once the horse is not able to use its feet, it's basically dead. And it's a pretty tough situation, and I have an acquaintance who's going through this with her horse, and fortunately the horse is doing quite well. It's gotten very good treatment and it's getting over it. But I said, now I understand why horse owners can be so fanatic that their horse shall only eat grass, and only a certain amount, and only at certain times. And another situation where these herbicides have understandable purpose is in dealing with something like Canadian thistle, which is a perennial weed. It's one of the worst perennial weeds in cooler climates. Sends roots down 10 to 20 feet, forms a network of spreading roots and rhizomes at 1 foot below the surface that then send up new shoots all over the place. And these herbicides are very effective on Canadian thistle. Very few other herbicides are. However, I talked to Klaas Martens is an organic grain grower in New York State. He and his family manage 1,400 acres of organic grain and an organic feed mill.
Wow.
He bought an old mill from Agway that the mill had gone out of business, and it's now in full capacity operation, providing for organic farmers nearby. Anyway, this fellow is like, you take the best scientist you can think of and the best organic farmer, you put them together and you have Klaas Martens, because he has developed an understanding of weeds and cover crops and tillage like I've not encountered elsewhere. And he said that Canadian thistle thrives in soils that are so compacted that they're partially anaerobic. And it actually works its way out of a job because it's bio-drilling 10 feet down. So while it's being a terrific nuisance, he says what you do is you let it grow until it's flowering, just beginning to flower, and it's got most of its energy above ground, and then you till it and you really set it back. And meanwhile, if the soil, you can help the soil to open up by perhaps doing some deep chiseling. And once the soil is opened up and that drainage and aeration situation is improved, it will no longer domineer. It'll be a minor part of the weed flora. And it rings true. There's a part of our garden where we have Canadian thistle pretty bad, and I realized, well, that's the part that hasn't done as well as the rest. Most of the field is extremely well drained, but it's bottomland. This one spot isn't, and nothing grows, but the Canadian thistle pretty does. Yeah. So it's like, that was quite a digression, but those herbicides, they are used a lot, and they're probably going to be with us for a while, because there are people who see them as the only solution to whether it's optimum horse nourishment or whether it's dealing with these really virulent weeds, or a few others like some of the bindweeds that have roots down to China, and you just gotta, if you really want to get rid of them and you don't have the organic understanding of how to work with the ecology to work them out of the system, then these pyridine carboxylic acids can look awfully tempting.
Well, and Mark, they're being sold. This is something that struck us very severely here in our drought a few years ago.
Yes.
Because those herbicides weren't used on the hay fields here.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I'm getting calls from all of our organic farmers that they're having crops die.
Yeah.
And that's where we found out that while we were doing hay lifts to our state,
Uh-oh.
we were bringing in hay from regions where they were using this. So now, though, it's being sold as a sustainable way to produce hay, because you only have to apply this herbicide one time. So you're making fewer. So for the hay grower, it looks like a good thing, and it's fine for feeding the animals. It basically passes through the animals intact. But nobody ever thought about what happens to the manure. On big horse farms, you're supposed to respread that manure onto your pastures that you want all grass. But in this area, we have a lot of small horse farms, like the one my husband and I have.
Yes.
You know, we can't spread the manure. We don't have enough room to do that. Besides, I want clover in my pastures.
Your horses do well on clover.
They grow on them, eat a mix. I want them to eat a mix. I'm not raising thoroughbreds.
Right.
But so this has become a very big problem for us here. And we wrote a publication, because what we found is if you just go to the growers around here, the hay producers, and ask them if they use herbicides, they'll say they don't use anything, or they don't use anything wrong. You have to hit them with exactly the name. And so we have the list in this publication. You say, did you use any one of these?
In the last 5 years.
Well,
3 years at least.
it's on that cutting of hay. You want to know about that cutting.
Uh-huh.
So,
But it stays in the
usually
ground for 3 years.
It does. It does. We haven't seen too much uptake into the growing plant after a couple years.
Oh, really? That's good.
But if you've got that hay and you compost it, you're right, we've seen it up to 4 years.
Right.
So it's
As far
turned
as
into
far
a
as
real
it-
problem here.
Sorry, I didn't mean to-
Yeah.
As far as I understand, it's got a half-life of 3 years. Is that true? Or?
Supposedly, but our weed scientists that have worked with this, the ones that have helped me write that publication, said they've seen it up till 4. They can't show it in the research,
That's not the half-life, though, because it's probably less than half concentration of 4
but it doesn't take very much.
No.
Doesn't that mean, if it has a half-life of 3 years, does that mean it could potentially be there for 6?
Actually longer
Oh, yeah.
So it's half of what remains.
Right.
each time.
Right.
So
It's an exponential decay.
Yeah.
And you want to get it down to a tenth. So even if it has a half-life of 1 year, you have to wait 4 years to get it down to a tenth of the application rate.
And you want to know the weirdest thing with it. Last year we had a woman that produces llamas in another county. She knew about this problem. She'd run into it the year before. She did her best to avoid it.
Yes.
And when we had a real heavy snowstorm, she had to buy a couple extra bales of hay from someone because she couldn't get to her hay source. So she makes this compost, and I start getting phone calls from gardeners in Asheville saying we're having a problem. So I ask her to bring me her raw manure, and we go and we pot up a bunch of tomatoes, and I've done a whole blog post on this. We pot up a bunch of tomatoes, we grow them up to about this tall, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks. We had them grow to, and I put a post out there saying her manure was good, see, no problems. I get an anonymous comment saying, wait a couple more weeks.
Oh, you put the manure in the mix?
We made pure, it was almost pure manure that
Oh,
we grew
bioacid.
those tomatoes in, little seedlings.
Mm-hmm.
It was at about 8 weeks when they were starting to set fruit that all the symptoms showed up.
Whoa.
So that's the part I don't understand. That's what I would love to get a grant and have a graduate student on that project, because why did they grow for so long just fine and then those symptoms express themselves?
Because I've been telling
you were
everybody,
fruit.
do a seedling test.
And that's-
Do a seedling test.
And it's on, and the bean seedling test that you see, that's what I've been recommending. We're getting ready to revise that publication because I have one herbicide on there now that does not have that product in it, and so the company wants me to take it off the list, and also to update that information because it's now not accurate. But if you go to my post, blog post, you will see very clearly what those symptoms will look like. So it's really, really critical that you understand what went into making that manure.
Yeah.
Because you can't wait 8 weeks to find out.
I went on that blog. It's a great resource. That's what we used before we bought that hay for our mom. Let's see. I don't know what else it is.
It's a scary, scary problem, Mark.
And they have a new one, a pyrimidine carboxylic acid called aminocyclopyrrolachlor, and has the same kind of properties.
Same thing.
So why do they keep inventing all these new compounds?
Because they work for the person growing that crop,
Yeah, right.
We use this for beneficials
but not
a
for
lot.
waste management.
Cilantro. Just toss a couple of cilantros out and you can get some coriander. But those little leaves, those little flowers are really great for floral nectaries. Is that right? And little beneficials and little habitat. So
Rocco, are you having much problem with the kudzu bug yet?
it's all over the fig in there. We haven't seen it do any damage.